Julian Ashford had learned long ago that fear traveled faster than footsteps. In Chicago's underworld, his name moved through rooms before he ever entered them, whispered with caution, sometimes with reverence, sometimes with dread. He controlled territory most men only dreamed of touching, money routes that crossed borders, digital shadows that swallowed evidence, rerouted accounts, erased people from systems that once defined them. He ruled not with noise but with precision, quiet commands, clean consequences. And yet, on this particular night, none of that mattered. Julian adjusted the cuff of his tailored jacket, his reflection staring back at him from the darkened window of his penthouse. The city glowed below like a living organism, pulsing with lights and secrets. This city feared him. This city obeyed him. But the man in the glass saw something else entirely. A wheelchair positioned neatly beneath the desk. Hands steady, controlled. A body that had not moved the way it once did since the night everything changed. They called it an accident. A vacation, a cliff, a miscalculated dive. That was the story printed in reports and repeated in polite circles. Only a handful of people knew the truth, that the fall had been arranged, that the betrayal came from inside his own circle. That survival had not been part of the plan. Julian survived anyway, paralyzed from the waist down, yes, but alive. And survival, he had learned, was the most dangerous form of defiance. The underworld adapted quickly. Fear did not fade. If anything, it sharpened. A man who ruled from a chair was a man who had already lost everything once and lived. That made him unpredictable, untouchable, dangerous. Society, however, was less imaginative. In boardrooms disguised as charity galas, in restaurants that pretended to welcome everyone equally, Julian saw the same looks again and again. The brief hesitation, the softened voice, the pity wrapped in politeness. Men who would have trembled if they knew who he truly was instead offered sympathy. Women looked past him entirely, eyes sliding away as if disability erased dominance. Feared in the shadows, pitied in the light. That contradiction lived inside him, a quiet ache he never allowed to show. Power insulated him from many things. Loneliness was not one of them. The blind date had not been his idea. "You need optics," Marcus had said earlier that week, voice careful, respectful. Marcus was one of the few Julian trusted. Loyal, smart, alive because he understood silence. "You can't keep appearing untouchable. The families are watching. They want to see stability, humanity." Humanity. The word had almost made Julian laugh. Marcus had chosen the restaurant. Exclusive, neutral ground. A place where deals were whispered over wine and no one asked too many questions. The woman came with credentials, educated, connected, someone who understood appearances, someone who, Marcus believed, would not be distracted by the wheelchair. Julian had agreed, not because he believed in the date, but because he sensed something in the air. The same instinct that had saved his life more than once. The feeling that a night could change the direction of things, that this was not about romance or even optics. It was a test. He wheeled himself toward the elevator, movements practiced, controlled. His men waited outside, always nearby but never obvious. He waved them off. Tonight was meant to look normal, harmless, just a man going to dinner. Inside, he was anything but. As the car descended, Julian felt the familiar weight settle in his chest. Not fear. He had made peace with that long ago. This was something else. The awareness that whatever awaited him tonight would not wound his body, but it might bruise the part of him that even power could not armor. He straightened his spine, jaw tightening. Whatever happened, he would endure it the way he always did, with silence, with control. Still, as the elevator doors opened, and the lights of the city welcomed him back into the world that only half saw him, a single thought crossed his mind, uninvited and unwelcome. Tonight would test more than his pride. And for a man who had already survived betrayal, blood, and loss, that realization unsettled him more than any threat ever had. The restaurant was quiet in the way only expensive places ever were. Soft music floating through the air, low voices wrapped in restraint, crystal glasses catching the light like small frozen stars. Julian entered without ceremony, rolling past the host stand with calm authority. His presence subtle yet undeniable, heads turned before people understood why. The woman was already seated. Veronica Hayes sat perfectly upright, back straight, chin lifted, dressed in elegance that felt sharp rather than warm. Her eyes scanned the room with practiced confidence. Calculating value, influence, hierarchy, she looked like someone used to being admired, used to choosing rather than being chosen. Then her gaze landed on the wheelchair. The change was instant. Her posture stiffened, breath caught, eyes narrowing not in curiosity, but in surprise she had not prepared for. The kind of surprise that exposed truth before manners could recover. For a brief moment she forgot herself, forgot the performance, forgot the room. Julian noticed everything. He noticed the flicker of disappointment she tried to bury, the pause before she stood, the way her smile formed too late and too carefully. He had seen this before, the subtle shift that told him the evening had already gone wrong. She greeted him politely enough, but the warmth never arrived. Her words were correct, her tone measured, yet something sharp lived beneath it, like glass wrapped in silk. She sat farther from the table than necessary, creating space as if distance might protect her image. Julian spoke calmly, his voice even, controlled, offering conversation, asking about her work, her interests, her life. She answered but never expanded, never returned the questions. Her attention drifted to her phone, to the room, anywhere but him. The restaurant seemed to sense it too. Nearby tables quieted, glances lingered longer than they should have, whispers moved between strangers. Julian felt it settling in, that familiar pressure. The moment when power meant nothing and visibility meant everything. Veronica finally leaned forward, fingers resting on the table as if bracing herself. She said she had expectations, that she lived a public life, that appearances mattered. She spoke about events and reputations and the importance of standing beside someone who fit her world. She never raised her voice, never needed to. Cruelty delivered softly often cut deeper. Julian listened without interrupting, his face unreadable, his hands still. He let her finish because experience had taught him silence could be heavier than anger. When she said it would be difficult to be seen with him, when she suggested that people would talk, that questions would follow, that her career could suffer, something tightened in his chest, not rage, not yet. Something older, heavier, the echo of every room where he had been reduced to a condition instead of a man. She stood suddenly, decision made, gathering her purse with finality. She said it was nothing personal, that she had standards, that she wished him well. Then she added the final wound, implying he would be better suited for someone who wanted a project rather than a partner. Chairs shifted, a fork clinked against a plate, the room held its breath. Julian remained seated. He felt the heat rise in his face, felt the weight of watching eyes, felt the instinct to remind everyone exactly who he was and what he controlled, how easily humiliation could turn into consequence, but he did nothing. Veronica walked away, heels striking the floor with confidence, unaware of how close she had come to danger, unaware that restraint had spared her. Julian stared at the empty chair across from him, the space she left behind louder than any insult. In the shadows he was feared. Here in the light he was invisible. And somewhere deep inside him, beneath the calm exterior, beneath the power and discipline, loneliness settled like a quiet verdict, heavier than any threat, heavier than any loss, because it reminded him that even kings could be dismissed when the world chose not to see them. The silence after Veronica left was heavier than any insult she had spoken. It pressed against Julian from every side. The kind of silence that exposed everything. The kind that invited judgment. Chairs creaked softly. A glass was lifted and set down too carefully. Somewhere a waiter hesitated, unsure whether to approach or disappear. Julian remained where he was, hands resting calmly on the armrests. Back straight. Expression controlled. Inside him something darker moved. He felt eyes on him. Not the sharp, fearful glances he knew from the underworld. These were different. Curious. Uncomfortable. Sympathetic. Sympathy was the one thing he despised. In the shadows, men lowered their voices when he passed. They respected the damage he could cause. Here in the light people stared, because they believed he could cause none. Julian counted his breath the way he had learned during rehabilitation. Slow, measured, intentional. Control was survival. A man at a nearby table whispered something to his companion. Julian did not need to hear the words to know their shape. Poor thing. What a shame. How tragic. Tragedy had nothing to do with this. He had survived betrayal that would have ended most men. He had rebuilt an empire from a hospital bed. He had ordered deaths without raising his voice. Yet a single evening had reduced him to a spectacle. The waiter finally approached. Young, nervous, eyes darting away too quickly. Julian could smell fear on him. Not because of the wheelchair, but because the staff here knew exactly who he was. Sir, the waiter began, then stopped. Unsure what question was safe. Julian looked up at him. Voice steady. Calm. Bring me the wine list. The waiter exhaled in relief and hurried away. Julian stared at the empty chair across from him. Veronica had not just left the table. She had stripped the illusion from the room. For a moment, Julian imagined what would happen if he let go. If he allowed instinct to speak instead of discipline. One word into his phone. One signal. And this restaurant would empty in minutes. He did nothing. That was the true power he had earned. The ability to choose restraint when violence was easy. The past returned uninvited. The night on the cliff. The sound of laughter just before the push. The water rushing up to meet him. The moment his body stopped responding. He remembered lying in the hospital. Unable to move. Listening to doctors speak as if he were already gone. Remembered the way people looked at him then too. With pity. With certainty that his life had ended. They had been wrong. Still, nights like this reminded him how narrow the space was. Between being feared and being forgotten. The wine arrived. Expensive. Dark. Strong. Julian lifted the glass. Took a slow drink. Let the burn ground him. He told himself he did not need companionship. Did not need approval. Did not need to be seen. Yet something in his chest disagreed. Something human. Something unarmed. He had built walls high enough to protect an empire. But loneliness slipped through every crack. That was when he sensed it. A presence not filled with discomfort or caution. Someone standing too close. Not out of obligation, but intention. Julian turned his head. And for the first time since entering the restaurant, he saw a pair of eyes looking at him without calculation. Without pity. Without fear. The night was not finished with him yet. And deep in his gut, the same instinct that had saved his life whispered a warning. Whatever came next would change more than the evening. It would change the balance of everything. The woman standing beside his table did not hesitate. She did not fidget. She did not look around to see who was watching. She simply stood there, solid, unmoving, as if she had decided something important and would not be swayed. Julian looked up at her. She wore the uniform of the restaurant. Black and white. Simple. Practical. Nothing about her suggested she belonged in his world. Yet something about her presence disrupted it. Excuse me, she said softly. But her voice did not shake. It carried weight. Not volume, but conviction. Julian studied her face. Brown eyes steady. Jaw set. Anger simmering beneath restraint. Yes, he replied. She took a breath. Then did the unthinkable. She pulled out the empty chair across from him. The one Veronica had abandoned. And sat down. A ripple of shock moved through the room. Servers froze mid-step. A manager stiffened near the bar. Nearby diners stared openly now. Julian felt something shift. Danger. Not to himself, but to her. You should not be here, he said quietly. They will notice. Let them, she replied, her gaze never leaving his. Some things deserve to be noticed. He was not used to defiance, especially not for his sake. She leaned forward, hands folded, voice low but fierce. What she did to you is wrong. Not awkward. Not unfortunate. Wrong. Julian felt the words hit deeper than expected. No one ever said that. They excused. They softened. They avoided. She continued. I watched the whole thing. The way she looked at you. The way she spoke. Like you were an inconvenience instead of a person. Her fingers tightened slightly. I could not just walk away. Julian searched her face, trying to understand her motive. You do not know who I am, he said. No, she answered. But I know what I saw. The manager started toward them. Steps sharp. Expression tight. Missy began. She turned to him calmly. I will return to my station shortly. I am finishing something important. This is not appropriate, he warned. Neither was what just happened here, she said. And someone needed to say that out loud. The manager hesitated, then glanced at Julian. Recognition flickered. Fear followed. 10 minutes, he said finally. Then you return to work. She nodded once. Accepting the cost. Julian watched the exchange with quiet astonishment. You risked your job for me, he said. She shrugged. I have lost jobs before. I have never lost my integrity. Something cracked open in his chest. Not painfully. Slowly. Why, she asked. Why did you sit there and take it? Julian exhaled. Because power does not always mean reaction. Sometimes it means restraint. She smiled faintly. Then you are stronger than anyone in this room. The words landed softly. Yet they carried more weight than any threat ever had. She introduced herself as Elena, a name that felt warm in his mouth. Real. She told him about her sister, about hospitals and stairs and cruelty, dressed as concern, about learning early that dignity must be defended loudly. Julian listened. Really listened. For the first time that night. The room faded. He was no longer a boss. No longer a symbol. No longer a man in a wheelchair being observed. He was just a man. Being spoken to. Being seen. And somewhere, beneath the steel and discipline, beneath the fear he commanded, Julian felt it. The night had shifted. The waitress had made her gesture. And nothing in his world would remain untouched by it. The 10 minutes stretched quietly. Then they broke open. Elena stayed seated, not glancing at the clock, not shifting with nervousness, as if she had decided that whatever happened next mattered more than rules or consequences. Julian noticed the way she listened, not waiting for her turn to speak, not measuring his value, just listening. It unsettled him more than hostility ever had. Tell me about you, she said. Not your power. Not your money. You. The question landed like a challenge. Julian leaned back slightly, eyes drifting toward the dim lights of the restaurant. I do not talk about myself much, he said. I can tell, Elena replied. That usually means no one ever asked in the right way. A faint smile tugged at his mouth before he could stop it. He spoke slowly. About growing up surrounded by violence disguised as loyalty. About learning early that trust was a luxury. About how control became his armor. He did not mention blood. Did not mention orders or disappearances. But Elena understood more than he expected. Power like yours always costs something, she said quietly. Julian looked at her then. Really looked. She was not impressed. Not intimidated. Not dazzled. She was curious. He surprised himself by continuing. He told her about the accident. About waking up and realizing his body no longer answered him. About the months where the world spoke around him instead of to him. They stopped seeing me as dangerous, he said. They started seeing me as broken. Elena shook her head. Broken is when you give up. You did the opposite. The words settled deep. Outside the table, men watched discreetly. Phones vibrated. Messages were sent. The underworld noticed when Julian Ashford stayed, seated longer than planned. Elena felt none of it. She told him about her sister, about holding her hand during long hospital nights, about fighting teachers, doctors, strangers, people who decided what her sister could never be. They already wrote her ending, Elena said. So I learned to speak louder. Julian felt something unfamiliar. Respect without fear. Do you ever get tired, he asked. Of fighting. Every day, she said. But I would be more tired if I did not. The manager glanced over again. More anxious now. Aware that something irreversible was happening. Julian felt it too. This was not attraction. Not yet. This was recognition. A dangerous thing. People who truly saw him either feared him or tried to use him. Elena did neither. She saw him and stayed. When she finally stood, her shift calling her back, Julian felt the absence immediately. Before she left, he reached into his jacket, pulled out a card, wrote a number by hand. If you want to continue this conversation, somewhere safer for you, he said. Elena took the card. Eyes steady. I will, she replied. As she walked away, Julian sat alone again. But the loneliness was different now. It no longer felt permanent. Somewhere between humiliation and silence. Between restraint and ray. A door had opened. And for the first time in years, Julian Ashford wondered. Not who could stand beside him, but who would choose to. Even when the truth finally came out, Elena walked out of the restaurant unaware that the world she was stepping into had teeth. She folded the card carefully and slipped it into her pocket. To her, it was just a number. Just a man who had been treated unfairly. Just a conversation that felt honest in a city full of masks. Julian remained seated long after she disappeared through the service door. His eyes stayed fixed on the space she had occupied. Not because he was lost in fantasy, but because instinct had begun to scream. Around him, the restaurant slowly returned to movement. Forks scraped plates. Voices rose again. Yet something had shifted beneath the surface. His phone vibrated once, then twice. Short messages. Coded. Efficient. They are watching. Who is she? You stayed too long. Julian did not respond. He already knew. In his world, nothing happened by accident. Not humiliation. Not kindness. Not timing. The same people who had arranged the blind date were already asking questions. The same shadows that tracked money and blood now tracked glances and gestures. A waitress sitting with him. Defending him. Risking her job. That was not small. That was a signal. Julian rolled toward the exit. His men fell into position without being called. Silent. Alert. Outside, the city air felt colder. He lifted his face, slightly letting the night ground him. For the first time in years, someone had reached for him without knowing who he was. That made her dangerous. Not because she intended harm, but because harm would now look for her. Elena spent the rest of her shift unaware of the storm forming. She cleared tables, poured wine, laughed softly with coworkers. Yet eyes followed her. Not the curious kind, the measuring kind. One of the bartenders leaned close. You know who that man was, right? Elena shook her head. Should I? The bartender hesitated, then decided against it. Better you do not. When Elena left that night, she did not notice the car idling across the street. Did not notice the man pretending to check his phone. Did not notice the rhythm of steps matching hers at a distance. Julian noticed everything. From his car, he watched her walk. Saw the way she kept her shoulders straight. The way she paused to help a stranger pick up dropped keys. The way she lived without armor. It unsettled him. People around him survived by hardness, by distance, by cruelty. Elena survived by refusal. His phone vibrated again. Rival eyes. Territory chatter. They think she is Leverett. Julian closed his eyes briefly. Leverett. The word tasted wrong. She was not leverage. She was not a weakness. She was not a pawn. She was a choice. And choices were dangerous in his world. The blind date had been optics. The humiliation, a reminder. The waitress, a complication. Yet deep down, Julian knew the truth. This had never been about reputation. Someone wanted to see how he reacted when stripped of power in public. Someone wanted to see whether he ruled with fear or control. They had their answer. But now there was another question. What would he do when someone innocent stood in the line of fire? Julian exhaled slowly, hands tightening on the armrests. He had built his empire on anticipation, on moving before threats formed. And now, for the first time, his greatest threat was not an enemy. It was attachment. And somewhere across the city, Elena slept peacefully, unaware that she had already been noticed, already been discussed, already been pulled into a world that would demand everything. Julian stared into the darkness. This was no longer just a night that tested his pride. It was the beginning of a war between the man he had become and the man he was becoming. The call came before sunrise. Julian was already awake. Sleep had become shallow since the restaurant, since Elena, since the world had tilted. The voice on the other end was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that came from confidence. They spoke without greetings, without threats, because none were needed. An alliance was being offered. Territory access, clean routes, protection across borders, power wrapped in generosity. Then the condition arrived. She must disappear. The words were delivered without emotion, as if they were discussing inventory, as if a human life was a line item. Julian did not respond immediately. He rolled toward the window. The city still dark. Streets quiet. Chicago unaware of how easily its balance could shift. You brought her into the light, the voice continued. That makes her visible. Visibility is liability. Julian felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Not fear. Not Ray. Recognition. This was the real test. The blind date. The humiliation. The silence. None of it had been random. Someone had wanted to see him diminished. Wanted to see if he would reach for violence. Wanted proof that his disability had softened him. Now they wanted proof of something else. That he could still choose power over people. He ended the call without agreeing or refusing. His men waited outside his office. Faces tense. They already knew. She is being discussed, one said carefully. Julian nodded. They always talk before they act. What are your orders? Julian closed his eyes. Images rose uninvited. Elena sitting across from him. Unafraid. Unimpressed. Speaking truth without armor. She had not asked for protection. Had not demanded attention. Had not tried to matter. And that was precisely why she did. If he gave her up, the alliance would cement his dominance. No one would question his authority again. If he refused, he would invite pressure, retaliation, war. He turned his chair slowly, facing the men who had bled for him. No one touches her, he said. The room went still. We will protect her, one offered quickly. Julian shook his head. That would turn her into a prisoner. She does not belong behind walls. Another silence, heavier than the first. Then what? Julian exhaled. I will tell her the truth. The men exchanged looks. Surprise. Concern. She does not know who you are. She deserves to. Later that evening, Julian waited in a quiet space overlooking the river. A place neutral enough to feel safe, yet honest enough to feel real. Elena arrived unaware of the storm coiled beneath the calm. She smiled when she saw him. The same smile that had already cost him leverage. You look serious, she said. Julian met her eyes. Steady, unflinching. Because tonight he would not hide. Not from enemies. Not from her. There is something you need to know, he said. Elena sensed the shift immediately. Her body stilled. Attention sharpened. I am not just a man who was treated badly on a date. I am not harmless. And I am not safe to be close to. He told her everything that mattered. Not the gore. Not the mythology. The danger. The surveillance. The ultimatum. When he finished, the silence returned. Different this time. Elena did not step back. Did not cry. Did not accuse. She simply breathed. Then she spoke. Are you telling me because you want me gone? Julian shook his head. I am telling you because for the first time, I refuse to decide for someone else. Her eyes searched his face, looking for manipulation, finding none. And if I walk away, she asked, I will protect you from afar. And if I stay? Julian swallowed. Then this world will test you. And I will never forgive myself if it breaks you. Elena stepped closer. You think I do not already know what it means to stand where I am not wanted? Julian looked at her and realized something terrifying. This was no longer about power. This was about choice. And whatever she chose next would decide not just the fate of an alliance, but the man he would be when the dust finally settled. Elena did not answer immediately. She stood there, watching the river move beneath the bridge lights, as if she were measuring the weight of the truth he had just placed in her hands. Julian waited. He did not interrupt. He did not explain. He did not soften it. This was the moment that mattered. Most people begged at moments like this, promised safety, offered money, offered control disguised as protection. Julian did none of that. Because for the first time in his life, he wanted a choice made freely. Elena finally turned back toward him. Her expression was not fear, not anger. It was clarity. So let me understand, she said slowly. People want me gone because I sat down at a table. Julian nodded. Because you treated me like a man. She let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. That is the most dangerous reason I have ever heard. He did not smile. I will help you disappear if you want, he said. New job. New city. No one will ever connect you to me. Elena stepped closer. Close enough that he could see the reflection of the lights in her eyes. And if I say no? Julian felt the answer before it came. The way he had felt the push before the fall. The way instinct always warned him too late. Then I will make enemies you were never meant to face. She studied him. Not the wheelchair. Not the posture. Him. You are afraid, she said. Julian did not deny it. Not for myself. That surprised her. She sat down on the bench beside him, shoulder almost touching his. My sister lives every day in a world that tells her she should be invisible, that she should not take up space, that she should be grateful for whatever scraps of dignity people give her. Elena looked straight ahead. I learned early that safety bought with silence is not safety. It is just a slower kind of disappearance. Julian closed his eyes briefly. You do not owe me anything, he said. She turned toward him sharply. I am not staying because I owe you. I am staying because I choose to. The words landed with a force that made his chest tighten. Julian looked at her then. Really looked. This woman was not naive. She was not reckless. She was brave. And bravery in his world came with a cost. If you stay, he said, there will be moments where you regret it. Elena nodded. There are moments I regret being born into this world too. That never stopped me from living. He felt something shift. Something irreversible. Very well, he said quietly. Elena raised an eyebrow. Very well, what? Then you stay by my side. Openly. And I stop pretending I can protect you by keeping you small. She reached for his hand. Rested her fingers there. Gentle. Steady. I do not need you to make me safe, she said. I need you to be honest. Julian exhaled. A long, slow breath that felt like surrender. That honesty would ripple outward. It would be noticed. Interpreted. Tested. By morning. Everyone would know. He gave instructions that night. Not for walls. Not for cages. Visibility. Elena would not be hidden. She would be seen. Because hidden people were disposable. Seen people required consequences. The first challenge came faster than expected. A message arrived just before dawn. A location. A warning. Bring her. Or bring her absence. Julian stared at the screen. Then at Elena, who stood beside him tying her hair back calmly. As if preparing for any other day. You do not have to come, he said. She met his gaze. You do not get to face this alone anymore. When they arrived together, the room fell silent. Men who had ordered violence without blinking now hesitated. Because the waitress had not fled, had not bowed, had not been erased. She stood beside him. Not protected. Not owned. Chosen. And in that moment, Julian understood the truth that would shatter his world. Power had never been about fear. It had always been about who dared to stand. When standing came at a cost. The room did not explode into violence. That was what surprised everyone. Men who ruled through fear expected shouting. Threats. Blood. Instead, they found silence. Julian rolled forward slowly. Every movement deliberate. Controlled. Visible. Elena walked beside him. Not behind. Not protected. Not hidden. Eyes followed them. Calculating. Uncertain. This was not how power was supposed to look. The men seated around the long table had planned for intimidation. For leverage. For weakness. They had planned for Julian alone. They had not planned for her. One of them finally spoke. Voice rough. Measured. You were warned. Julian met his gaze calmly. I was tested. Another man leaned forward. And you failed. Julian shook his head. No. I learned. Murmurs moved through the room. Quiet. Dangerous. Elena felt the weight of it. The danger. The history. The expectation that she would shrink. She did not. Instead, she stepped forward. Just one step. It was enough. You think I am here because I was dragged, she said. Because I was promised something. Because I was afraid. Her voice did not tremble. I am here because I chose to be. The room stilled. Men who had never been spoken to like this. Men who commanded cities. Now listened. Julian watched her. Heart pounding. Not with fear. With awe. She continued. You believe power is something you take. That respect is something you demand. That fear is proof of strength. She looked at them one by one. I watched a woman humiliate this man in public. Not because he was weak, but because she thought he was. She turned slightly toward Julian. He did nothing. Not because he could not, but because he chose restraint. That is power. A chair scraped softly. Someone shifted uncomfortably. Elena was no longer a liability. She was a mirror. You want him to prove he is still dangerous, she said. You want him to sacrifice someone innocent to reassure you. She lifted her chin. If that is the cost of your loyalty, then maybe he has already outgrown you. The silence cracked. One man laughed quietly. Not mocking. Nervous. Another stared at Julian. You would risk everything for her. Julian answered without hesitation. I would lose everything before I let this world decide who deserves dignity. That was the moment it happened. The moment the balance shifted. Fear changed direction. They saw it then. Not weakness. Not sentiment. Something far more dangerous. A man who could not be controlled. A leader whose power did not depend on cruelty. Someone stood. Then another. One by one. They nodded. Not submission. Recognition. Outside the room. News traveled fast. The waitress had not been erased. She had been acknowledged. From that moment, Elena was no longer invisible. And in the underworld, visibility was protection. Julian rolled back beside her, his hand finding hers. Quiet. Steady. She did not smile. Neither did he. They did not need to. Because everyone in that room understood. This was no longer about a blind date. Or humiliation. Or optics. This was about evolution. The old rules had been challenged. Not by violence, but by presence. And the most dangerous revelation of all settled into the air. The waitress was not his weakness. She was the proof that power could chain. And that scared them more than any gun ever could. The truth surfaced quietly, as the most dangerous truths always did. It was not revealed in a meeting. Not shouted in anger. Not leaked through blood. It came through a confession. The humiliation at the restaurant. The blind date. The calculated cruelty. It had never been about romance. Julian learned it days later, when one of his oldest rivals requested a private conversation. No guards. No weapons. Just words. The woman you met was sent. The rival admitted calmly. Her reaction was expected. Her role was to see what you would do. Julian listened without interruption. They wanted to know if the man in the wheelchair had grown soft. If pain had replaced instinct. If pity had replaced dominance. They wanted to know whether Julian Ashford would lash out. Or disappear inward. You disappointed them, the rival continued. You did neither. Julian leaned back. Expression unreadable. And the waitress. The rival paused. She was never part of the plan. That was the moment Julian understood. Elena had not been coincidence. She had been contrast. The world had placed cruelty in front of him, and waited for him to answer with cruelty in return. Instead, kindness had answered first. Not his. Hers. And that had broken the script. The rival shook his head slowly. You were supposed to choose fear. You chose restraint. Then loyalty. Then visibility. You changed the rules. Julian said nothing. There was nothing left to say. After that day, things shifted. Alliances realigned. Territories stabilized. Violence decreased in ways no one could explain. Julian did not become weaker. He became untouchable. Because no one could predict a man who valued dignity over dominance. Elena stood beside him publicly. Not announced. Not claimed. Present. She did not wear power like armor. She wore it like truth. And people adjusted. The city adjusted. Those who had once looked past Julian now looked twice. Not because of fear, but because of certainty. He had survived betrayal. He had survived paralysis. He had survived humiliation. But what transformed him was recognition. Not from the underworld. From one woman who sat down when everyone else stood away. Julian and Alina did not build their future in secrecy. They built it in daylight. They created spaces where strength was redefined, where disability was not hidden, where dignity was non-negotiable. Those who underestimated them disappeared. Not violently, but irrelevantly. Years later, people still told the story. They spoke of the blind date, of the waitress, of the man who ruled without standing. But the truth was simpler. The disabled mafia boss had never been broken. The waitress had never been small. And power had never belonged to those who humiliated. It belonged to those who chose humanity. When cruelty would have been easier. Julian once believed fear kept him alive. Now he knew better. It was love that made him unstoppable.